My abusive adoptive parents wanted me to give up my unborn child to them. They kicked me out when I was 17 and pregnant after I refused. Now they want to come back into my life. When I was 17, my adoptive parents kicked me out because I got pregnant and wouldn't give up my baby. Fast forward 20 years and their biological son found me on Facebook. I lost my real parents in a car accident when I was just 4. I don't remember much about the crash, just waking up in a hospital surrounded by doctors and nurses, which was super scary for a kid. A CPS worker was there to tell me my parents were gone and that I'd be staying with another family for a while. It was all really confusing. After that, I bounced around a bunch of foster homes, none of which felt like home. Finally, at 5, I landed with Fanny and Nathan, who were really excited to have a kid. They were warm and caring, and for a moment, it felt like I had a family again. But I quickly noticed that Nathan was really strict and Fanny always seemed to go along with him. I later found out that Nathan's strictness came from his time as an army vet who had been injured. His military background explained why he was so obsessed with everything being in order. Even though I understood where he was coming from, it didn't make it any easier when he'd get mad over little things, like being late to church. His strictness always made me feel on edge, like I had to tiptoe around him. Fanny, in contrast, was pretty chill, but had a tendency to drink heavily when Nathan wasn't around. I'd see her polish off whole bottles of wine by herself, often lost in her own thoughts. She hardly ever asked about my schoolwork, and besides drinking, her main focus was cooking and cleaning, since Nathan was super picky about that. At first, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice many fights between them, but as I got older, Nathan's true colors started to show. He was abusive. For him, my grades were everything. He was always pushing me to do better, and if someone else did better than me, he would fly off the handle. Even a small drop in my grades would lead to him hitting me and calling me dumb. He often threatened to send me back to the orphanage if I didn't meet his standards. As a kid, I didn't realize those threats were just empty words, but they scared me every time he brought it up. I worked my butt off to avoid being sent back. I also noticed Fanny and Nathan getting into fights, which usually ended with him dragging her into their bedroom. She would come out with bruises on her hands and face. At first, I didn't get what was going on, but it quickly became clear that he was physically hurting her. To keep me from seeing his violence, he would isolate Fanny. I couldn't understand why she never called the cops. After their arguments, she would just sit there crying for hours, while Nathan would drink beer and zone out in front of the TV. Realizing how abusive Nathan was made me dread being alone with him or doing anything that might set him off. Living in an abusive environment teaches you that abusers will always find a reason to explode. No matter how cautious I was or how much I tried to keep the peace, he always managed to get angry about something. At first, it was all about my grades, but as I got older, his focus changed. Suddenly, it wasn't just about school anymore. He had something to say about everything: my clothes, my friends, even who I liked. He made it clear that I had to come straight home after school, insisting that hanging out with friends was a waste of time and they wouldn't lead to anything good. He wanted me to concentrate solely on my studies. Little did Nathan know, Fanny quietly let me hang out with my friends for an hour after school. Since Nathan wouldn't be back until later, she thought it was a good chance for me to have a little normalcy and some fun outside the stressful home life. Those little escapes from the constant pressure were so important to me, and I cherished every moment with my friends, no matter how brief. Fanny's small act of kindness really meant a lot. Things took a turn for the worse when Nathan lost his job. That job loss seemed to crank up his frustration and anger, making the already toxic home life even worse. With money troubles piling on, Nathan became even more unpredictable, snapping over the tiniest things. I remember one night when Fanny had just finished dinner. As Nathan sat down and looked at the food, he exploded, ranting about how it wasn't good enough. He started yelling, banging on the table, and berating her, even threatening to kick her out if she couldn't cook right. In a fit of anger, he hurled his plate against the wall, leaving Fanny and me shaken as we watched him. I could feel my body shaking all over. When I finally got around to eating, I realized there was nothing wrong with Fanny's cooking at all. As time went on, Nathan's drinking got worse. With him out of work and just lounging around, beer cans piled up in the living room every morning, and Fanny had to deal with the mess. I also found it hard to hang out with my friends because Nathan would go off on me if I was even a minute late getting home from school. At 15, a classmate named Claude told me he liked me and asked me out. Even though I was nervous about Nathan finding out, I was excited to go on a date and see what it felt like to have a crush. So, despite my fears, I said yes to Claude. We met up at a local coffee shop after school and spent the afternoon talking and getting to know each other. That date ended up being one of the best choices I ever made, kicking off our love story. Claude was everything Nathan wasn't, sweet and kind to everyone, even animals. He would surprise me with my favorite flowers whenever he could, saving up his allowance to do it. Having never had a good example of how to be treated, I didn't expect much, but Claude showed me the care and respect I had always wanted. Nathan was always a bit suspicious and would grill me about whether I was hanging out with any boys. I would deny it, hoping he wouldn't find out the truth. Luckily, not having a phone meant there were no texts he could stumble upon. Claude and I were careful to keep our relationship under wraps, even avoiding telling our friends to steer clear of any rumors. Claude got my fear of Nathan and was totally cool with keeping things secret. When prom was coming up, we decided to go with our group of friends to keep things low-key. But when Nathan found out about my plans for prom, he flat out said no. He brushed it off as pointless and wouldn't buy me a dress. Honestly, I didn't care about the dress at all, I just wanted to have a good time with my friends that night. I pleaded with him to let me go, reminding him of my solid grades and how I had met all his expectations. He scolded me, downplaying my friendships and insisting that prom was no big deal. Fanny didn't agree and stood up to Nathan, arguing that there was no reason for me to miss out while everyone else was having fun. Nathan was adamant that teenagers didn't know right from wrong and that he wouldn't let me go out just to enjoy myself when I could stay home and be safe. No matter how much I begged and tried to explain how much this event meant to me, he wouldn't budge, treating my feelings like they were nothing. He even warned me that he'd lock me out if I tried to sneak out for prom. On the night of the dance, I was the only one stuck at home, spending the evening crying in my room. I was getting really tired of living with Nathan. After high school, it was even tougher to see Claude since I wasn't allowed out and didn't have a phone. I asked Nathan for a phone, but he insisted I didn't need one at my age. I argued that I'd be going to college soon and that everyone had a phone, but he said I'd have to buy one myself if I wanted it. That's when I decided to get a part-time job. Even though the pay wasn't great, it helped me earn some cash and gain a little independence. Plus, it meant I could hang out with Claude without Nathan knowing, using work as my cover. Eventually, I got the amazing news that I had been accepted into an Ivy League university with a full scholarship. This was a huge deal since no one from my town had ever pulled it off before. Nathan took it upon himself to brag about my achievement to anyone who would listen, going on and on about how proud he was of me. But even with all that bragging, he never actually congratulated me directly. It was like he thought my success was somehow his win too. When I got my college acceptance, I felt this massive wave of relief wash over me. Finally, Nathan had nothing to complain about since I had landed a spot in a top college with a scholarship, which was his biggest dream for me. With my job and school success, he couldn't call me lazy anymore. His newfound happiness led him to agree to buy me a phone and let me use my work earnings for college stuff. He even let me hang out with my friends after work. For the first time, I felt like I could actually enjoy life, just like everyone else. Claude and I knew we'd be going our separate ways for college, but we promised to catch up whenever we could. Our relationship was careful and limited, with both of us being cautious. A couple of weeks later, I started feeling weird, like I was about to get my period, but it never came. I could tell something was off with my body, and I found myself craving food at strange times. In a panic, I told Claude I needed to take a pregnancy test, and he was on board. I took 3 tests, and all of them were positive. The shock hit me hard, and I just collapsed on the floor, crying my eyes out. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. Claude tried to comfort me, but I was shaking with fear. I knew if Nathan found out I was pregnant, especially right before college, he would explode with rage. Claude kept telling me that the choice was mine to make and that he'd be there for me no matter what. Claude recommended that we chat with his parents first before approaching Nathan together to avoid any potential outbursts. Given my tough home life, he was really worried about my safety. His parents were super understanding. His mom gave me a hug and reassured me, saying that this kind of thing happens to a lot of people and not to stress too much. They offered to come over to help me break the news to Nathan. When Fanny and Nathan found out about the pregnancy, they were completely taken aback. Fanny asked me twice if I was sure, and I confirmed it with results from several tests. Nathan, on the other hand, exploded in anger, blaming me for his hesitation to adopt kids from strangers because of their unpredictable nature. He threw a bunch of insults my way, saying I had messed up my life. Claude's parents tried to calm him down, but he turned his anger on them, blaming them for everything and looking like he might confront Claude, who was just sitting quietly in the corner. I was so overwhelmed that I started crying and told Nathan I wasn't planning to keep the baby, so he didn't need to worry. I promised him that things could go back to normal and I would still go to college as I had planned. At that moment, Fanny asked to talk to Nathan alone. They stepped out while I sat there, crying and feeling anxious. Claude's parents looked at me with sympathy. When Fanny and Nathan came back, what Fanny said hit me hard. She suggested that we didn't have to give up the baby, proposing that I could carry it to term and then transfer my parental rights to them. I was left speechless as Fanny emphasized that the child was a gift from God and urged us not to think about other options. Nathan was totally on board with Fanny's idea, saying it would be perfect since she was already pregnant. I was left completely confused, trying to figure out what he was really suggesting. He mentioned that Fanny had just found out about her pregnancy and had kept it to herself while she processed everything. Now, with my own pregnancy, they thought it would be a great chance to raise both kids as siblings. Their suggestion hit me like a ton of bricks and I was left speechless, trying to wrap my head around the seriousness of what they were proposing. Claude's parents were just as shocked and quickly voiced their disapproval. But Nathan jumped in, insisting that the choice wasn't theirs to make, and he looked at me, waiting for my answer. I was overwhelmed with anxiety, and deep down, I knew I couldn't agree to what Fanny and Nathan were suggesting. The thought of giving up my child to be raised in a situation similar to my own troubled past was just too much to bear. Even though Fanny had shown she could be a caring mom, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was dealing with Nathan's behavior, which made me question my child's safety. The idea of putting my unborn baby in a potentially dangerous situation was simply unacceptable. I dreamed of being a mother someday, but the timing and circumstances were all wrong. I couldn't bring a child into this world knowing I couldn't ensure their safety and happiness. I told Nathan firmly that while I was happy about the idea of a sibling, I couldn't go through with the pregnancy. I just didn't have the mental or physical strength for it. The thought of my child growing up with Fanny and Nathan, pretending they were just siblings, was unimaginable. Living a lie and denying my child the truth about who they were was something I couldn't handle. When I shared my decision, Fanny broke down in tears, clearly upset that I couldn't go along with it. Nathan was clearly furious as he stood up and started pacing around the room. I tried to share my perspective, but they just wouldn't listen. Claude's mom jumped in to back me up, even offering to set up a gynecologist appointment to help move things along with the procedure. Fanny's sobs grew louder and Nathan began yelling, questioning if I was happy now that I was hurting her so much. He then ordered me to pack my things and get out. I was in shock as Nathan expressed his frustration with me, calling me ungrateful and selfish for not giving them my child. Claude's parents gently encouraged me to hurry up and pack, clearly worried about Nathan's explosive behavior. I rushed upstairs to grab my important papers, photo albums, and as many clothes as I could manage. When I returned downstairs, Nathan warned me to take whatever I could carry because he intended to throw away and burn the rest of my stuff the next day. I tried to talk to Fanny, but she wouldn't even look my way. As I was leaving, Nathan told me I should never come back. I felt lost and heartbroken, struggling to comprehend what I had done to deserve such harsh rejection. Claude and his parents kindly offered me a place to stay, and I went back to their home. The next few days were a blur as they took me to the gynecologist, where we arranged the necessary procedure. It was a tough choice for both me and Claude, but we knew it was the right decision for our future given the situation. After the procedure, I spent a few days recovering with Claude by my side, providing constant support. He and his parents were incredibly generous and did everything they could to help me through this tough time. Throughout all of this, Nathan and Fanny never reached out to me. The day I was set to move into college, I shot a text to Nathan, hoping he might have come around. Instead, he hit me with some pretty harsh words, calling me a failure and a disappointment, even accusing me of being a prostitute. He made it clear he didn't want his biological child to end up like me. His cruel message really stung, and I ended up crying for hours. They were the only parents I had known, and now, with their own kids on the way, they had completely cut me off. College was tough, but in the end, it was worth it. I balanced a part-time job with my studies, working hard to keep my grades up. It was a struggle, but I was determined to make it work. Luckily, Claude kept his word and was there to support me all the way. He would come to visit me at college whenever he could, and his encouragement really helped me through the tough times. During breaks, his parents often invited me over, and they started to feel like family. I graduated with honors, earning the KL distinction, and Claude and his parents were there to celebrate with me. I landed a solid job in my field, and it felt amazing to see all my hard work pay off. Eventually, Claude and I moved in together, and our relationship only got stronger. We were there for each other through everything, and after a few years, we decided to tie the knot. Our wedding was a beautiful celebration of our love, surrounded by our closest friends and family. I didn't even think about inviting Nathan and Fanny. Now, as a married couple, Claude and I are building our life together. Recently, we took a big step and bought a new house, renting out our old one. Our new place has turned into a cozy home where we're making new memories and planning for the future. We chose this new spot to be closer to Claude's aging parents, who have really become like family to me too. I really want to support them however I can. It's been nearly 20 years since Nathan and Fanny kicked me out, and honestly, I hardly remember them anymore. I didn't think about them much over the years, but I do remember how tough my first year of college was without them. By the time my second year rolled around, I made a decision to create a new life for myself, one that didn't revolve around their rejection. It was a tough journey, and building this new life took a lot of strength. They've never reached out to me, and I haven't felt the urge to check on them either. Throughout all this time, Claude has been my rock and partner in every way. We may not have kids, but our 2 dogs have filled our lives with so much happiness. We go to visit Claude's parents every other weekend and love exploring new places to eat together. Looking back, I feel like my life has turned out pretty well, and I wish I could give my 17-year-old self a big hug and tell her everything will be okay. Recently, I got a friend request on Facebook from someone named Drew, and his last name sounded familiar. When I looked at his profile, I was shocked at how much he looked like Nathan. I accepted his request, and he sent me a message. I replied, and then he asked if I knew anyone named Nathan and Fanny. My heart started racing when I realized he was their son. Feeling a mix of nerves and determination, I told him I knew them since they adopted me when I was 5. Drew really wanted to chat if I was up for it, so I gave him my number. When he called, it was a bit awkward at first, but then he opened up about how he always knew about a child his parents had before him because he had seen my pictures in their family album. Every time he brought it up, his parents would just change the subject. He had been on a quest to find me for quite a while, having picked up my name from our hometown, and recently, he stumbled across my profile by chance. The only reason he reached out was to get to the bottom of things. As I shared the tough memories from my past, like how his parents pressured me to give up my child and then kicked me out when I said no, I could feel all those emotions flooding back. I talked about how they had been absent from my life for so long and how I managed to get through it all with the help of my husband's family. The whole conversation was heavy, and I let out feelings I had kept hidden for years. Bruce sounded shocked and couldn't believe what he was hearing. After a moment of silence, he admitted he had no clue his parents had treated me so badly. He always thought their version of the story, that I had left willingly. He genuinely thanked me for being open and apologized for his parents' actions, showing real regret for the hurt they caused me. Since we talked, I've felt thankful for Drew's outreach and understanding, which has given me some comfort and validation. Still, I can't help but worry about how Nathan and Fanny will react when they find out I told Drew the truth. Did I do the right thing by opening up, or would it have been smarter to stay quiet? Update 1. I have to say, my worries were spot on. Just a day after Drew contacted me, Fanny and Nathan started flooding my phone with calls and texts. Since I've kept the same number all these years, it was pretty easy for them to track me down. Their messages have been packed with anger and blame, mainly focused on why I spilled family secrets to Drew. Nathan's message hit hard, insisting I should have kept my mouth shut like I had for years and not gotten involved between him and his son. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure about how to deal with all this, I've been avoiding their calls and texts, not knowing the best way to tackle this unexpected drama. On another note, I filled Claude in on what's been going on. He had no idea about Drew reaching out, and when I told him I shared our history, he thought I shouldn't have. His worry wasn't about the truth itself, but that Nathan seemed really unstable, and this whole thing would just create more unnecessary chaos in our lives. I also had a chat with Drew, who mentioned he confronted Nathan and Fanny after our talk. They tried to deny everything, calling me a liar and accusing me of using them until I could get away to college. But Drew didn't buy their story and told them to back off from his family. He also said he'd be cutting them off financially. Drew shared that he and his wife recently adopted twins, but Nathan and Fanny didn't want to visit, which made Drew question their behavior. After hearing about my past, Drew got why they might be upset about his adoption. He promised to ask them to leave us alone and invited me to come see his twins whenever I could. He really wants to get to know me better since we're siblings. I'm really touched by his kindness and might just take him up on that offer to visit his family with Claude. Hey everyone, it's been 7 months since my last update, so I thought I'd fill you in on what's been happening. I finally decided to cut off all communication with Nathan and Fanny, and guess what? Their threatening messages have stopped. Drew stepped in and had a chat with them, which made them back off for good. Claude and I have been over to Drew and his wife's place at least 4 times recently. Each time has been super cozy, and we've spent hours catching up, sharing stories, and reminiscing about our childhoods. Plus, I've had a blast hanging out with Drew's twins, they're such a joy. I'm really thankful that Drew reached out to me. Reconnecting with him and his family has brought me a lot of healing and happiness. If you've stuck around this long, why not subscribe for more stories like this one? Thanks for tuning in.